Okay, so welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, where tonight we're going to be discussing what is an incredibly common condition or complaint that our patients have, which is around emotional eating. And I'm going to say that this is not a discrete problem. I think it sort of exists on a spectrum of we've all had times where we've, you know, had some junk food. Sometimes we might have had a little bit of junk food. Sometimes that might have led to, a greater amount of food that we have when we're feeling a bit emotional or upset about something, and that can then sort of move into a continuum of really kind of unhealthy eating patterns into then sort of binge eating. So everyone has probably experienced some emotional eating at times, but I guess what we want to do is look at where are we on that spectrum between, okay, well, sometimes I have a little bit of treat foods that maybe are not so good for me, up to sort of the other end of things in binge eating and everything in between. So no matter where you are on that spectrum, I think you'll find that part of tonight will be helpful for you. But I will cover all of that tonight. So let's get stuck into it. So feel free to enjoy the evening. Pop yourself on mute throughout, but video on is fantastic so we can see your faces. And as always, pop your questions in the chat and we'll cover those up towards the end. All right, so let's think a little bit about what causes emotional eating. Like I said at the start, a lot of my patients say, when I ask them, what do you think has caused weight gain for you over the years? And they say, well, I'm an emotional eater. It's just like straight up, I'm an emotional eater, which really insinuates that there's a fair bit of personal blame or lack of control or some kind of fault or failing, like that's not okay. I should be able to control myself. I should be able to stay on top of this. When we think about what causes so-called emotional eating, there's a whole lot of factors. And at the very basis of this is our underlying level of hunger and appetite. So our genetics will determine how well we've got a capacity to store energy in the form of excess fat. And when you have genes that predispose you to weight gain, it means that you're more efficient at storing energy. It means that you are more readily able to put excess calories into storage in terms of fat. It also means that you might be more prone, you might see high calorie, high energy density foods as a little bit more important or salient. In other words, it's a bit more attractive. Then on top of that, we've got the neurobiology, what happens in our brain around treat or reward foods. So I'll go into that in depth a little later. Then we've got triggers. So there might be things such as so we've got this background level of hunger and appetite drive and a body that's kind of predisposed to finding reward through food. And then on top of that, there might be a trigger. So that trigger could be, I've had a bad day at the office, or I've had a death in the family, or I've had a upset with my partner, or any number of things. It could be both negative and positive feelings, but there can be these triggers that kind of sets off that desire to eat. And then at the top of the pyramid, we talk about eating behaviours. So, and we'll cover that, each of these in detail, including how to manage each of them as we go. But let's get to sort of the very basis of what causes weight gain overall. So your body weight is regulated in your brain in a special part of your brain called the arcuate nucleus. And that part of the brain senses how much energy we've got on board, both in terms of our fat stores and how much food is in our gut. And it's this complex interplay of hormones and neurotransmitters that tell the brain, have we got enough energy or do we need to go and eat some more? And ghrelin is our major appetite stimulating hormone made in the stomach. And that says, not enough food, let's go get something to eat. And then as soon as we have food and it hits our gut, we'll get a cascade of hormones and neurotransmitters going up to the brain saying, I'm full. There's enough food here for us to last until the next meal. And it's the stretch of the gut, it's the increase in glucose and these other things that tells the brain, okay, we're good. We've got some energy on board. We can survive until the next meal comes along. And then it's our fat stores that produce leptin that say to the brain, not only have we got enough energy in our gut for the short-term energy, we've got some energy in our storage as well. So these are the hormones that regulate your weight and will tell your brain whether it's time to eat or not. So a lot of our eating patterns are actually driven by these gut hormones. The problem is everyone has a different level of these hormones. So people who are naturally lean won't feel hungry much of the time. They will feel full after a small amount of food, whereas people who struggle with weight will tend to be thinking about food a bit more often. We have, perhaps a bit more food noise going on, and we're thinking about food a bit more. And those high calorie foods can have a little bit more sort of appeal. And we can tend to not feel full until we've had a larger meal. That's the scientific basis. People often describe, I think about food a lot. I'm a foodie. I love food. I love carbs. These are the kind of the words that I hear from patients when they're describing this. And overeating can occur. So even though our brain regulates, have we got enough energy to meet our needs, we can actually override all those hunger signals by when we have some treat or reward foods. So if you think about sort of 10,000 years ago, it was about the food that you had was whatever you could hunt or pick off a tree. So those were the foods that we could consume. And now we've got such a broader range of foods that we can consume, and many of them are sort of processed and packaged and are sort of what we call a high energy dense foods. So those foods are specifically designed to be really yummy, hard to resist. In fact, food manufacturers have figured out exactly what combination of fat, salt, and sugar makes foods really addictive, and they've packaged them and marketed them, and they've got them on sale at the end of every shopping aisle to make sure that you consume them. We've just gone through Easter. It's amazing how many, chocolates are on sale, and as one of my patients said to me, when chocolate comes in the form of a bunny and in a silver wrapper, it's just even more irresistible. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for the marketing around food and the design of highly palatable and yummy foods that make it even harder to sort of say no to these foods. So let's have a think about the reward centers in our brain. So hundreds and thousands of years of I guess, evolution have proven that we've got a few key reward centers in our brain. So top left, we've got reproduction. We've got that with our little baby in the middle as well. Breathing is another sort of key drive in our body. If we don't breathe, then we die. Thirst in our top left-hand corner. That's also really important. If we don't drink, then we're going to become dehydrated and die very quickly. We're going to die of dehydration before we die of hunger. And our bottom two represent that drive to eat. In other words, if we don't have enough calories on board, then we don't have enough nutrients to survive. And that's also going to spell the terminal end. So if we don't procreate as a species, if we don't have that impetus to breathe, if we run out of water or food, all of those things are bad for survival of our species. So is it any wonder that our brain has figured out how to make sure that we survive? It's got really, really strong systems in our body to make sure that all of these things happen. And if you think about why do we not crave like steak and salad when we're hungry? Why would that be? Why is it that those other foods, the foods that are more higher in fat and sugar are palatable? It's because they've got more energy density in those foods. In other words, your body if there's a famine and there's not enough to eat, then if you can pack some punch in the food that you eat, the foods that are higher in carbs and higher in fat, they are going to be inherently more appealing because they're going to be give you lots of energy that you can store away. Whereas a steak and salad, that's going to be lower energy density. And whilst it's good for our body, it's not good in terms of stocking away energy for the future. So yeah, we have these reward centers in our brain because we are hardwired for seeking pleasure. And part of those activities around, food and reproduction and breathing and thirst, they give us a sense of pleasure. And without them, so our body is hardwired for moving towards things that are pleasurable and enjoyable, and moving away from things that are painful and difficult. So our brain is always looking for ways for stimulus and reward to feel good, and it releases lovely neurotransmitters like dopamine and noradrenaline and all these things and serotonin that make us feel good. So when we eat those highly palatable foods, then it does give us a flood of some of those neurotransmitters that make us feel good, which just reinforces some of those feelings when we do consume high calorie foods. So I'm going to show you. So this is represented if we look at where the reward center is in our brain. Now you don't need to get into the technicalities of this, but in the red part in the center, we've got our nucleus accumbens. So that's the reward center in our brain. So when we eat, it triggers a release of dopamine in that area of the brain. And the nucleus accumbens is that reward center, and that's important for us identifying the positive stimulus. In other words, if we get that food and it's yummy and full of calories, then we're going to get a nice release of dopamine throughout the brain. Then we've got our orbitofrontal cortex, which is good for deciding should we eat that food or not. So, this is our reward or punishment. So we get a nice little flood of dopamine, and that gives a little bit of reinforcement. And then we've got the hippocampus and amygdala, and these help us with the pleasurable feelings around food. So we develop memories. I'm like, oh, that chopped chip cookie and that nice glass of milk, and cuddled it up. We get these associations with winter or other pleasurable feelings. That all happens around the amygdala and the hippocampus. And then we use our higher centers of our brain to help us to decide whether we should choose that behavior or not. So that's about control and self-regulation. But what happens with emotional eating is that in people who are prone to emotional eating, it's very hard for those higher centers of the brain to override the very primitive drives around hunger and reward, because those things are quite strong. As I said, it's about survival of the species, and we're relying on our higher centers in our brain, our willpower, to be able to override those very strong primal drives. So this is just kind of representing that in a person who's more, and there's other genetics that predispose to this as well. There are certain patterns of addiction. Some people are more prone to sort of drinking alcohol or smoking or being addicted to sugar versus a non-addicted brain. So in the more brain that's prone to addiction, those levels of control are not as powerful as the very powerful reward stimulus. So that's a technical way of saying that sometimes you got the angel and the devil on the shoulder. Sometimes it's hard for that little angel to sort of have that override, and sometimes we can feel very like almost out of control when it comes to some of these really powerful addictive foods. And in fact, they did some studies showing people who are more prone to living with obesity, and they did some functional studies looking at their brain, and it showed that the brains of people prone to weight gain actually lit up more when the cheesecake and the cheeseburgers and the chocolate images came out. Their brain was lighting up going, yes, that's important for me. Whereas people who are not prone to weight, they didn't get as much stimulus in their brain when they saw those pictures. So this is not just about having enough willpower. It's also got to do with how our brains are hardwired as well. Okay. So the other things, so we've talked about our genetics and our background level of hunger. We've talked a little bit about the reward centers in our brain and how our brains are simply hardwired for seeking pleasurable activities, and food is definitely one of them. When we think back to COVID, a lot of patients were saying, well, all the pleasures and joy are taken out. All I've got left is food and alcohol. So, a lot of people put on their COVID kilos. But how we feel day to day and our background level of pleasure and joy in our life can have an impact on emotional eating as well. So there are certain conditions like ADHD, depression, or even substance use that are associated with a lack of joy and pleasure. And so ADHD in particular is where a condition where people look for stimulus and reward. And that can be through, they can be distracted by things going on around them, or they can find the stimulus of food very, very attractive. And so what happens is it creates a need for stimulation or for pleasure. So if we think about it, if you're having if you're feeling a bit flat, then your brain's like, oh, I just want to feel better. I want to feel good. How can I feel good? Well, your brain knows from experience that if you have a pleasurable food, that's going to give you a release of serotonin and dopamine and noradrenaline, like we just discussed in that reward pathway. So these conditions where we're, the technical terms I've just told you, ADHD, depression, substance use, but the non-technical terms are sometimes we just feel a bit blah. If we're feeling a bit blah, a bit low, feeling a little bit of the lack of joy in life, then that can lead to wanting to create some stimulus, create some joy, and that can often be where we turn to food. So some of the questions to think about are, how content am I feeling in my life right now? Are there areas where I feel quite content and feeling really good about things? And what areas in my life am I not feeling so content in? Am I struggling with feelings of anxiety or depression? In other words, do I feel on edge and nervous or worry about things? Or with depression, do I sometimes feel really flat and low and just lacking motivation and get up and go? And maybe it's not anxiety or depression, but just feeling a bit disconnected or even lonely. That was particularly highlighted in COVID, but, in our technology society as well, a lot of people can be, living in a family but still feel lonely, or living alone and still feel lonely. So what do I plug into for my sense of connection? Do I use alcohol to wind down or numb feelings? And are there areas in my life that might be out of balance? In other words, am I crazy busy at work and don't have time for my family? Or am I doing lots of things to care for the people around me and don't have time for myself? So really important to think about how is your joyometer? How much joy have you got in your life at the moment? And what areas need a bit of attention in your life? The other things that can affect your emotional eating are how you see yourself. So some people can have a really healthy sense of self-concept and they're feeling quite confident and know that they've got certain skills and talents or those good qualities that they really like about themselves, and others can really kind of doubt that, not be connected with that. So looking in the mirror may not be so comfortable, and you might have feelings of, I don't like what I see there, versus looking in the mirror and kind of going, yeah, I'm okay. So I think, our self-esteem, our sense of self-worth can also have an effect on whether we use food to kind of fill that void, I guess. Finally, there are some people are more prone to sort of binge eating if there's a history of addiction. Having patterns of restricting eating can also lead to overeating at times. Sometimes I see patterns in patients where they actually haven't learned how to manage difficult feelings, or actually they've learned from a very young age, either they were given food with they were upset, there, have a lolly, that'll make you feel better, or uncomfortable feelings just weren't accepted in the family, and so they were kind of bottled down. That can sometimes lead to using food to self-soothe, because every child, every person needs a way to feel good about themselves, and to express emotions and be heard. And if that's not there, then sometimes food is used as a substitute. So part of the journey of emotional eating is actually saying, well, the eating is kind of the band-aid on top, but we want to kind of get underneath a little bit and identify what is the eating there to soothe. And for others, there can be a history of trauma, whether that's sort of physical, sexual abuse or emotional abuse, and that can really lead to feelings of unworthiness and overeating to compensate as well. So we're kind of progressing from from time to time I have a bad day and I might have some ice cream and a chocolate, to using food to feel avoid, whether that's loneliness, disconnection, trauma, mental health conditions. And then I just wanted to explain to you about what the difference is between having a bad day of overeating to what we in medical terms call binge eating disorder. Now, I think everyone in their lifetime can probably say that they might have had a binge from time to time. We talk about binging on Netflix. We talk about, I had a binge on chocolate or Easter eggs. But the medical definition of binge eating is eating in a discrete period of time, say within a 2-hour period, any amount of food that is definitely larger than what most people would eat in that same period of time under similar circumstances. And there's a sense of lack of control. And the important word there is lack of control. So you might feel, you might definitely eat more than what others might have in the same period of time, but actually kind of be in control of that. But this binge eating is associated with a sense of lack of control. And 3 out of the 5 other things here. So eating more rapidly than normal, eating until feeling really uncomfortably full, eating large amount of foods. We're not feeling hungry, so it's not triggered by hunger. Eating alone, or being embarrassed by how much one's eating, or those feelings of feeling a bit, disgusted with oneself or depressed or very guilty after overeating. So that's the technical definition for binge eating disorder from the DSM-5. Anyway, you don't have to worry about the technicalities of that, but you might resonate with some of those feelings. And if that's you, I'd suggest that you have a chat to your Alevia doctor about it, who can put you in the right place, in the right direction to help. So just a little bit about binge eating disorder. So 16% of Australians at one point in time have had disordered eating. Of those, 4% have actually got a diagnosable eating disorder like anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating. But of that sort of 4% who've got a diagnosed binge eating disorder, it's not anorexia or bulimia, but binge eating disorder is almost half of those patients. So we hear a lot about anorexia and bulimia, but binge eating disorder actually makes up the majority, almost the majority of those patients, almost half. And there's actually quite a crossover between two conditions like ADHD and binge eating disorder. They both share a common neurobiology. Both of them have a lack of dopamine and noradrenaline. And what happens is that leads to difficulties with controlling our impulses. Like, I'm going past McDonald's and I see the big yellow sign and like, yep, I've got to find myself in there before I even know it. Or I'm kind of bored, I'm in a task, but I can't stick with it. And it's looking for, I might just go to the fridge and have something to eat, or I'm going to go grab chomp on some nuts or have some chocolate. And emotional regulation is also difficult in both of those conditions. All right, let's get to the most important part is, now that we know what the spectrum is of, from emotional eating to binge eating disorder, what are some of the strategies that we can use to manage emotional eating? So, this is a little bit out of order. We're going to go with the first one, which is controlling hunger. So this is covering our neurobiology of reward eating and genetics. And we'll work our way through to managing mood, then identifying the triggers, and then controlling the environment. So when it comes to control of hunger, I'll show you around how that can be achieved with weight loss medications, with a keto-style diet, high-protein diets, and then we'll look at managing mood and the others. So of the anti-obesity medications that we have available, what happens is that these medications help with controlling that background level of hunger. So many of my patients have said, I'm an emotional eater at the start of our consults. And then as they've started on something that suppresses hunger and appetite, they've realized that they're not an emotional eater. It was just that background level of hunger and appetite drive that was making it difficult and hard to manage some of those food situations. So having a body that is more, where there's a greater level of hunger means that there's, and living in an environment where you are seeing those foods all the time, it just makes it harder. So we want to reset the thermostat and help you to feel less of an appetite drive so that you can comfortably say no to those things. And I know some of our patients have said, when it came to binge eating disorder, that, something like, Ozempic has been far more effective than any kind of counselling that they've had for emotional eating or binge eating disorder. So these medications, what they do, they just take care of that background level of hunger. They switch off the food noise in the brain. They dampen all that activity down so that even if you are feeling emotional, it's not going to be food that you turn to first of all to fix that problem. So those are our treatment options. Next, we'll look at managing mood. So it's important to think about, okay, reflecting on some of those questions that we had before, how am I feeling? And just, is there this background level of sort of lack of joy or pleasure? Or is there any sort of underlying anxiety or depression or any other mental health condition? So just checking in, do I have a family history of any mood disorders? Are you experiencing any symptoms of say, depression or anxiety? Or do you identify with some of the symptoms of ADHD? And if you're not sure about that, you can do some screening with your GP. Or are there other just life stresses at the moment, things that are just a bit difficult to manage? And then just thinking, well, have I been using alcohol to maybe manage some of these underlying feelings of just blah, or indeed anxiety, depression, or ADHD? So just went back there a bit. Ooh, so then when thinking about how to manage mood, you want to think about, well, what areas of my life do give me joy and pleasure? Are there things that I love doing that are going to give me a greater sense of joy and enjoyment in my life? Because you want to be moving more towards those activities and away from the things that kind of suck the life out of you. So that might be that it would be spending time in nature that is restoring and for you. It could be that there is, that you enjoy, spending time with girlfriends or spending time with your family or caring for grandchildren. And, conversely, thinking about what sucks the life out of me. Are there things that I'm doing that I really shouldn't be doing, that are tiring or not my best skill set, or just, I'm doing, but I really don't want to be doing it and don't have to be doing. There's always that little subset of things that we don't want to be doing, but we've got to do. And yeah, if there was one area of your life that you could choose that is demanding of your energy, what can you, so for example, let's say you might have an elderly parent that needs care. If that's something that you do have to do, what other areas in your life can you modify and make a little bit easier? So we're going to flex over time with where our energy needs to be. But if you know that it's quite demanding in one area, or let's say there's a big work project going on, what can I do to make things easier in other areas of my life? In other words, well, maybe I'm not going to have time for food prep at that time, so I might need to do either some big batches of meals or get some freezer meals or some home delivery kits, for example. And then we get into the deeper stuff of, well, have I got a greater sense of purpose and meaning in my life? Like, have I got a sense of where am I going in life, and am I doing the kind of things that bring me joy and pleasure in my work and my day-to-day life? So they're just sort of points for reflection for you on ways to move towards greater joy and pleasure in life. So yeah, there might be some of those things that are in your control and some that are not in your control. And if they're not in your control, is that going to be in the short term, or is this a long-term problem and it needs some attention and needs some change? All right. And then what we might do now is talk a little bit about identifying some of those triggers. So I might just get you to pop in the chat what some of those triggers are for you. Do you resonate with any of these particular triggers? So some people say that they're more likely to be emotional eating when they feel tired or overwhelmed or busy, or just simply, oh, it's the end of the day. I made it to the end of the day, and I deserve some time to myself, or I deserve something as a bit of a reward. Others say that it's either boredom or loneliness that they struggle with. So I want to go through some of those common situations with you, and maybe think about either some ways that we can prevent that from happening, or an alternative or reward that you can look at as well. So I think the main question to have in our mind is if these are my triggers, if these are the things that are kind of causing emotional eating, how can I manage them so that I either don't get to that place, or I can think of a non-food way of managing that problem. So I want you to think through your particular situation, and hopefully you'll get some help with that. So tiredness. The question to ask yourself there is, am I getting enough sleep, and am I getting a good 6 to 8 hours a night? Some people need only 6 and they're quite happy with that. Others need to get 8 hours a night, and without that, they're going to sleep deficit. Getting up at the same time every day, no matter what time you go to bed, is important for your sleep hygiene and can help you to set into normal rhythms. When you don't get enough sleep, ghrelin increases at nighttime. You're going to be hungrier the next day. We often use food to kind of pick up our energy the next day, and that can be really hard. So making sure that you're really paying attention to your sleep hygiene and getting whatever amount of time you need each night. And that might mean setting up and saying, well, telling your family, this is it. You set your alarm. Maybe if you say that 10 o'clock's your bedtime, you set an alarm for 9:30. So you go and have a sleep routine. You go and have a shower, wind down, get into your comfy jammies, put your little moccasins on, do a bit of reading, and then get yourself off to bed. If you haven't had enough sleep and you're tired the next day, instead of using food, it might be that you go for a brisk walk and you get outside and use that as an opportunity to get some fresh air, just clear the brain and reset yourself. But you might also, for some people, the tiredness is not about their sleep, but it's about their mood. So you might want to look at, am I stressed? Am I overwhelmed? And do I need to redistribute some of my workload to others? Feeling overwhelmed can also be a common trigger. So it's, if you've got too much on your plate, then you need to be thinking, maybe popping those down into a little bit of a list. What are all of the things that I've got on my plate? What things need to be outsourced? What things do I absolutely need to keep on my plate? You might think you need to be across everything, so it's worth getting a partner or a friend to have a look at this as well and give you a bit of an opinion. Do you absolutely need to do this, or can it be outsourced to somebody else? And if you are feeling overwhelmed, you've done that sort of reevaluation of life, and yet you still find yourself feeling overwhelmed throughout the day, then maybe choosing to take either 10 to 15 minutes just to do an exercise in mindfulness, where you might just take some time out for yourself, head outside, find a park bench, or even, if you're at work, it might be that you sort of take yourself to a different room and just, do some breathing exercises for that 10 to 15 minutes. Winding down at the end of the day, often this is like sort of, we build up patterns and associations. So it might be, got the kids to bed, sit on the couch, out comes the ice cream or the glass of wine or whatever it might be. So I remember one time in our house, we actually physically changed our lounge room furniture around. So we weren't sitting in the same positions, and it was just kind of rejigging things. Not saying you have to take it to that extreme, but just review your associations. When am I more likely to eat? What are the situations and patterns that triggers the thought around eating? If it's sitting down for TV, maybe you don't sit in front of the TV after dinner, but you go for a walk instead. Or if that food trigger, if that trigger for eating is more about, I need something just to wind down and to unpack, what else could that be? Is it that you take that long bath and use that as your winding down time, or do you pop some music on and have a listen to that as you do the dishes mindfully? Or do you, listen, or do you take some time to do some mindfulness? So yeah, just think about, what else can I do that's soothing and calming, that's not about food. Boredom. Sometimes we're thinking about food just because there's nothing else that we're thinking about. There's a space in our brain, and that often, if there's that higher background level of hunger, it'll tend to be food. So we want to make sure that we've got that background level of hunger sorted first. We want to make sure that we are having adequate protein in our day so that we're not hungry when the next meal comes along, and just checking that we're not skipping meals. Alternatively, you might want to look at one of the resources in the membership. There is the our how to deal with hunger and cravings, and in there we've got a little exercise on the 3Ds, which is about distract, delay, drink water. And that resource as well has got a little bit about riding the craving waves. So dealing with hunger and cravings is one to watch. And then we want to, once we've identified, we've got that level of background hunger sorted, we've realized, we've made sure that we're doing things that give us pleasure and reward, and then we've looked at identifying those triggers. Then the final part is inviting your higher brain in and saying, well, my brain here is looking for a reward. What is the gap? What are my needs that aren't being met? Is it that I don't have enough energy? Am I looking for a little bit of a boost to my mood? Am I feeling lonely? Because you can only fix the problem when you've identified what that trigger is. What is my brain looking for? And yeah, so just a little hint in there. Whilst I'm going to make these suggestions about doing something that's going to be pleasurable for winding down or for to pick up your energy, there's no doubt about it that that chocolate is very much designed to give you that instant hit. So these substitutes, they're going to take a little bit more effort. They're going to take a little bit more they're not going to be that instant hit of like, a bit of chocolate or a bit of ice cream. We know that's going to give you that instant pleasurable feelings. The other alternatives are about soothing and feeling better, but they take a little bit longer. They're not going to be that instant hit. So whilst it might feel a little bit harder, the rewards for you will be that you'll feel more in control, and you won't have the health, the difficulties of the extra weight that comes with having the treat foods. So we'll talk a little bit about controlling your environment. So I'll tell you a story about one of my patients who, he said, I find it really hard to not have treat foods. And I was like, tell me a bit more about that. And he said, well, my partner loves treat foods, and she's got a basket on the kitchen bench that's got chocolates and lollies and sweets and everything else in it. And it's really hard to not eat them when they're right there. And I just thought to myself, of course it's going to be hard. Like if you open the pantry or the fridge and the first thing you see is going to be those chips or a bit of chocolate or something, then that you're basically, it's making it hard for yourself. So I'd encourage you to kind of look at your own fridge and pantry and say, well, if I open it, am I likely to see, that picture in the center where I've got fresh, vital foods, plenty of healthy food opportunities that I look at first of all? Or is the first thing I see, are they going to be sort of more of those high calorie foods that we're talking about? So you want to make sure that you do your sort of kitchen makeover, that you've had a good look through your fridge and pantry, and you're doing your big veggie fruit and veg purchases at the start of the week, that you know that there's going to be an abundance of healthy foods to choose first and foremost. And that the treat foods, if they're in your house, they're either at the top of the cupboard, the back of the cupboard, the bottom shelf, and that you've got easy food options like those ones on the right there. If you find that you are tired, you can't be bothered cooking and you want something quick and easy, that you've got, your My Muscle Chefs or your You Foods or other pre-prepared foods for the times that you are a little bit tired. So yeah, when I talk about controlling your food environment, what I mean by that is make sure that good food is easily accessible and is front and center when you open your fridge and pantry. And that if treat foods, must be in your house for other people that enjoy them, make sure they're just not, in your face all the time, and that that you make it hard to get these things for yourself. That if you do want these foods, that you've got to go out shopping for them, that they're just not easily accessible. And that just makes it easier for you rather than having to walk past that, tray of lollies on the bench, that they are out of sight, out of mind. Because again, think about our brain. It just wants the easy fix. You may not be hungry, but as soon as you see that chocolate, oh man, I need to have that. And if you're finding that tonight has touched on some things that you want to explore a bit more, that's a great chance for you to have a chat to your Alevia GP, and you might be able to delve more into whatever sort of came up for you tonight. So it might mean that you want to sort of look at your mood a bit more. It might be that you want to delve into more of some of those food triggers, or you think, well, you know what, I'm struggling with my appetite, maybe I need to get that under control, and that doctor can discuss weight loss medications for you. So just remember, all of those resources are there within the membership portal. So you've got, I might just stop screen sharing for a moment and just direct you to some of these resources that are at your fingertips. Okay, so I'll just do a screen share again for you. Back into Zoom. Okay, so some of the things that you might find handy here would be our Tools for Success modules. So I was referring before to there's some really key ones here. So we've got Breaking Bad Habits and Unconscious Eating. That's week number 7. Dealing with hunger and cravings and stress and emotional eating. Those 3 modules are worth having a listen to because I've got some really handy tips that will support tonight. Yeah, so, and if you're looking for yeah, some healthy snack ideas, you can jump into here as well for some healthy snacks that can support you. And yeah, so don't forget, you've got all these resources ready and rearing to go for you. And if you're looking for some more information about medications as well, and which ones might be appropriate, then we've got our resources here under medications as well. So that brings us to a close for tonight's webinar around emotional eating. I hope that you've found something helpful there for you that will help you in your quest to managing your weight successfully. And we'll open up for questions now.